Virginia and the Yale Law School. After graduating from law school, he engaged in the private practice of law, then clerked for Judge Robert Bork on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. From 1983 to 1993, he worked at the U.S. Department of Justice, including as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel. He joined the law faculty at the University of Virginia in 1993. In 2008, he was on leave from the law school to serve as counselor on international law and legal advisor to the United States Department of State. His principal academic fields are structural constitutional law, administrative law, federal courts, and constitutional history. Skipping over the empty seat to Theo Wald. Theo Wald is a visiting fellow for law and technology policy at the Heritage Foundation. Wald is the former Solicitor General of Idaho. Previously, Wald served as the acting assistant attorney general in the Office of Legal Policy at the Department of Justice and deputy assistant to the president for domestic policy under President Donald Trump. Wald clerked at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit for Judge Janice Rogers Brown and the U.S. District Court for the District of Puerto Rico for Judge Jose Fuste. Wald is an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force. Wald holds degrees from Georgetown University, where he studied government and English, and from the University of St. Andrews, where he studied English literature, and a JD from the University of Notre Dame. Mr. Wald and his wife have 5 children and live in Boise, Idaho. Sean Spicer. Mr. Spicer served as the 30th White House press secretary, is the author of 4 best-selling books, and the host of the Sean Spicer Show. Mr. Spicer previously served as communications director and chief strategist of the Republican National Committee and worked for several members of Congress. He currently serves on the board of visitors of the U.S. Naval Academy, holds master's degrees from the U.S. Navy War College, and is in his 26th year of service in the U.S. Navy. Mr. Spicer is a native of Rhode Island and resides in Virginia. It is the tradition of this committee that all witnesses will be sworn in. If you please rise, I'll swear you in now. Raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. And now we'll start with you, Mr. Harrison, with your opening statement. Sure, Mike there. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith, Senator Cornyn. The committee has asked me to discuss Congress's power to regulate the process by which the president's signature is affixed to a document other than a bimanual signature. That is to say, the use of an auto pen or similar technology. I have 4 points to make. The first is that the Constitution and the laws generally, when they require that the president act by signing a document, do not require that the president manually sign the document. The Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel wrote an opinion on that subject in 2005, which is quite extensive, and I find it persuasive. The concept of signature is signing a document is more general than, like a lot of concepts, more general than its central application. The central application is manual signature, but that's not the only way by which someone can sign a document. Someone can also sign a document by indicating that the person signing the document has decided that that person's signature should be affixed to the document by some process other than manual signature. The second point is that as a general matter, Congress has power to carry into execution the constitutional powers of the other branches of government. The last power that is conferred on Congress by Article 1, the Section 8, is the end of what's called the Necessary and Proper Clause, and it provides that Congress shall have power, I'll read the whole clause, to make all laws which will be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, that's Congress's other powers there in Article 1, Section 8, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. That's the last part. That's the part that's relevant here. It's sometimes called the horizontal necessary and proper clause because it operates horizontally among the 3 co-equal branches. Congress is the legislature. There are times when one of the other constitutional powers can use support that can be given only by the force of law. And that is something that Congress can do with a horizontal and necessary and proper power. The next thing I'll say is there are some principles, I think, that should govern exercises of the horizontal necessary and proper power. The first is that it operate to support, to assist, to make cause to function better the power that is being carried into execution, be it that of the president or that of the federal courts. The second is that in supporting the other powers, Congress not seek to exercise powers that are vested elsewhere, like the power to decide cases, like the president's power of pardon. And third, when Congress exercises that power, it should make sure not to put substantial burdens on the exercise of the other powers that it's seeking to support, powers that once again are vested elsewhere. With Congress's horizontal, necessary, and proper power. In particular, Congress can require that when the president indicates that his signature is to be affixed to a document without manual signature, that that decision by the president be documented and some individual record that the president has made that decision, and that be made part of the public record, say by being published in the Federal Register or the weekly compilation of presidential documents. A statute like that would carry the president's power into execution, because making sure that the president really has made a decision and that it wasn't made by someone else with the president's auto pen is a way to make sure that the power is properly exercised, that is, by the president. As long as a statute like that is completely neutral, applies the same way to all presidential decisions, it shouldn't raise any problem of Congress trying to control the president's authority. Again, constitutional powers are vested in the other branches and supported by Congress under the horizontal necessary and proper power. And third, a requirement of documentation. Well, the White House does a lot of documents. The requirement of documentation would not place a substantial additional burden on the president and the processes by which the president acts. And I would suggest that if the committee consider legislation along these lines, that it inquire into the paper flow process currently used in the White House, so that any statute Congress enacts will make that process work better rather than burdening it, making it not work as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wald.
Senator Cornyn, Senator Schmidt, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning about how the cover-up of President Biden's mental decline endangered America's national security and undermined the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution vests executive power in a single person, the president. At the founding, the president exercised the executive power through only a small group of trusted advisors and personnel. In fact, President Washington had a 4-member cabinet. Today, the president directs a Leviathan executive branch with 15 cabinet departments and at least 4 million full-time executive branch employees. The executive branch proliferation has a single source of democratic legitimacy, that by order of U.S. Constitution's Article 2, the president is both elected by the American people and vested with the executive power, all of it. Traditionally, the president takes positive actions and authenticates those actions through his signature. His signature is required for the most significant actions he may undertake: to sign an executive order, to take any action invested in him by the Constitution, as in granting a pardon, and to take the most important action of all, to sign a bill into law. In all these cases, the president's signature is itself the protection of democratic principle. When the president signs, he communicates his assent and endorsement of the action he takes. The auto pen is a device that signs the president's signature to a document. The Oversight Project, of which I am a board member, has discovered that the Biden White House deployed an auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to pardons, prison commutations, executive orders, and presidential proclamations. The Oversight Project's research has found that the Biden White House first deployed the auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to a proclamation on day 5 of his administration, and that there were at least 3 different auto pen signatures in use throughout President Biden's tenure in the White House. In June 2022, the Biden White House began deploying the auto pen to sign clemency warrants and executive orders. Auto pen use skyrocketed from there. We found that of the 51 clemency warrants issued during the Biden presidency, over half, 32 in total, were signed with an auto pen. And these include some of the most controversial acts of clemency of the Biden presidency, including death row commutations and the preemptive pardons of members of the Biden family, Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and more that were issued in the final days of the Biden presidency. We reviewed President Biden's schedule in his publicly available media and were unable to find any record of President Biden's personally approving these actions, such as a statement issued by the president himself to reporters. In addition, we found that the Biden White House used the auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to clemency warrants and executive orders while the president himself was in Washington, D.C. for at least some of that day, and thus was presumably available to sign important executive actions. Finally, we found multiple days where President Biden wet signed a bill into law, but used an auto pen to issue an executive order or for other important executive actions. The Biden White House's widespread use of an auto pen to affix President Biden's signatures to documents that exercise executive powers belonging solely to the president poses significant constitutional, legal, and practical considerations. Once the president's signature is copied and loaded into the auto pen, the machine can sign documents as the president himself would. To be blunt, by using the auto pen, anyone can sign documents as the president himself. Now, to be clear, I'm not here today to suggest that the auto pen is bad. It's just technology. I'm here today because of questions concerning President Biden's capacity and whether the auto pen was used to usurp presidential power or to conceal the president's decline. As the sitting president's mental acuity declined, potentially to the point of incapacitation, his administration's expansion of the powers of the presidency raises more questions than answers. Any investigation into this matter should focus not only on whether President Biden directed or authorized subordinate staff to take action in certain instances, but whether he had the capacity to do so at all. The 25th Amendment lays out clear procedures for what to do when the president is incapacitated. It was carefully drafted and informed by our nation's history. The Biden administration ignored it all to aggrandize executive power and push the country further in their preferred ideological direction. It is our obligation at this point to get to the bottom of these issues and to ask the important question as to whether or not the auto pen and other devices were used to cover and obscure President Biden's mental decline, undermining our national security and also the Constitution. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning.
Right on time. Pretty impressive. Thank you. Mr. Spicer.
Chairman Schmidt and Cornyn, members of the committee, thank you for having me. I was asked to share my experience as a senior White House staffer with respect to the interactions that I and other senior staff had with President Trump during his first term. During my tenure as press secretary, I interacted with the president multiple times every day. Most days I would talk to him by phone or in person early in the morning and then multiple times throughout the day, including weekends. For the most senior positions in the White House, those designated by the rank of assistant to the president, which includes the White House chief of staff, the White House counsel, and the press secretary, it is critical to have regular interaction with the president. The position of press secretary especially demands this type of consistent and intentional communication. I or any other press secretary, regardless of administration, could not do the job effectively without regular communication with the president. It was my responsibility to have the most up-to-date understanding of President Trump's position on policy, personnel, and everything in between. Admittedly, I made a couple of rather high-profile mistakes during my tenure. You may have read some of them. But in all cases, those mistakes occurred when I wasn't connected with the president's thinking or position on a particular issue or policy. Coordinating and collaborating among even the most senior staff cannot replace direct communication with the president himself. In my position, I was very well acquainted with the president's work, his day-to-day responsibilities, and his fitness for office. I watched him serve with the strength and endurance of a man half his age. As you can see on almost a daily basis through events, statements, and social media posts, he's up early and ends his days very late. Yet in several instances during his first term, the media questioned his fitness for office. Guests and so-called experts like Sanjay Gupta at CNN were called upon to speculate on the result of Trump's physical and mental well-being. The Washington Post ran hit pieces with headlines like, "The White House struggles to silence talk of Trump's mental fitness." Vox wrote, "Is Trump mentally unfit to be president?" NBC ran a story by the Associated Press that raised mental health concerns regarding the president. CNN's Brian Stelter questioned if members of the news media were, quote, tiptoeing around obvious questions about President Trump's instability. These headlines were not isolated instances. Most major news outlets ran with these ridiculous type of propaganda pieces. To use one of the media's favorite terms, these inquiries were without evidence.